Sarah, how was your game?
We were totally winning until I got a serious gash on my finger from a cleat stepping on it. Then I had to sit out.
Well, you know I have some medical experience if you would like me to look at it.
Sure. I just cannot seem to get it to stop bleeding even with these bandages.
It seems that your blood may not be coagulating correctly. I'd better take you to the hospital so they can properly treat it.
Hi, and welcome to my video about wound healing. So, as you saw in our little scenario in the beginning, that wound healing is a very common process. So, obviously the major concern for this is blood loss. And it's really something that we in a modern medicine world take advantage of because we see it most commonly on a smaller scale. So something like, again, a simple gash that you can have from a soccer game or scraping your knee because you fell off a bike or that sort of thing. But it actually, in a big world picture and in trauma situations, is a serious concern and issue. And this can be seen in scenarios such as surgeries with hospitals or with trauma patients out on the battlefield and military situations. And it's really important that we develop possible new ways to treat this major blood loss that commonly leads to death. So the first thing we're going to do in this video is go over the general process of how a wound heals and also some basic research that really kick-started, some possible options on how to fix this. So the first thing we need to talk about is what is the largest organ? So we have tons of organs in the human body, and some people may think it's something such as the heart, but that's not it. And they may think that it's something like the stomach, but that's not it. The largest organ is actually our skin, and it covers the entire surface, and it actually contains more vital, in a sense, organs. Now, the skin is composed of different kinds of layers, with the outermost layer being the epidermis. So this is why when you're looking at, you're actually seeing this is really important. It helps with water retention. It protects vital organs, like I said earlier. This is what's exposed to the skin. So it's getting, UV protection. It has, the feeling, so we can feel things, nerves, that sort of thing. So that kind of signaling. And this is constantly shedding and changing. The next layer is called the dermis. Now, the dermis is right underneath the epidermis, and this is what contains, like it says here, things like blood vessels, which is really important because it allows oxygen to get to different cells, obviously in like the epidermis, that are needed. So when you have an actual wound, what happens is the dermis layer is damaged. It goes through the epidermis to the dermis, and that is why we bleed, because those blood vessels are being disrupted. And this allows for outside factors then to become a part and affect the inside part of our body. So a wound goes through multiple stages that you can see here, and it occurs from the actual time that it was wounded to how long it takes afterwards. Now, there's a lot of argument because you can see the overlap that's occurring here and here, that these kind of they happen over time, but at the same time, a lot of them kind of have overlaps and they're happening at the same time because the process, they depend on each other. So the four main processes are homeostasis, inflammations, proliferation, and remodeling. And the homeostasis, this is when the actual blood clotting is performed. Inflammation is important for stopping bacteria. Proliferation builds the basic structure, then allows remodeling to actually form that scar or recover the skin. So we're going to go through these one by one. So in homeostasis, this occurs immediately after damage. So as soon as those blood vessels are disrupted, this process is going to jump straight in. And is when the blood clot forms. So the important part of a blood clot, which usually forms from platelets and also other proteins, is that it protects against microorganisms. So say that, I cut myself and I'm near dirt or something. So it's going to protect me from that bacteria getting inside, which is really important because having that exposure to the outside environment provides a massive opportunity for incredibly life-threatening and dangerous bacteria to get in and to cause major infections. It's also important because it provides a matrix for the invading cells, so it induces growth factors. So this kind of platelet is going to form a basic structure that can then be used to then build skin over it. So let's say that we have a blood vessel here. and it gets cut. So instantly, we're going to have blood coming out. So what first is going to happen, as you can see here, is that it's actually going to constrict to help trying to, in terms of volume and pressure, stop the blood flow. And then we're going to have platelet factors, these nice little yellow dots here, are going to come in and they're going to stop the bleeding. And this is the process of coagulation. And then they're going to turn into what we call fibrin platelets. And this is what's going to form that more harder basic structure that then allows the actual healing process to take place. So obviously this is the most important step in a wound healing, because if you don't stop the blood loss, that becomes life-threatening, because you can have things such as hemorrhage, or you have a lack of blood oxygen, that sort of thing, and that's what's most important. And the next part is mostly just encouraging the platelet formation that initiates the covering of the wound to continue so that you have a permanent fix. So a fun research fact is that there's these things called occlusive dressings, and they actually enhance platelet formation and collagen synthesis, and the growth factors were actually found to be induced by them. So these are common dressings used in a hospital, and you can see here it creates like a moist environment. So it's actually found that wounds heal better under moist environments, and you can see here it has like a gel type material, and then they place like a fabric to cover it up, and that wounds heal faster that way. So that's kind of like a first innovation that's really found with wound healing. So the next step is inflammations, and this is another really important step, because this is when, again, that bacteria is being stopped. So what does this is called neutrophils, monocytes, and lymphocytes. And the three processes you can see they do is they perform phagocytosis of cell debris, which means they engulf like those damaged cells. You have like little cell particles going around, so it's going to collect that. It's going to defeat microorganisms, which are the things like bacteria. So it's really important to help prevent infections. So this is why when you get a wound, maybe like it turns red and it's all like inflamed and sort of that's the actual inflammation stage, and it's actually fighting off that bacterial infection. It's when you see a permanent inflammation or the inflammation becomes severe is when you know that your wound could potentially actually be infected, because it doesn't get to go past this stage. You can look at this as inflammation is a superhero, a protector from microorganisms. So stage 3 is proliferation, and proliferation is really rebuilding. So the first thing that will happen, one of them, is angiogenesis occurs. So as you know, with a wound, these blood vessels then have to be repaired. So when the blood actually starts clotting or coming out of the wound, their blood vessels are open. And angiogenesis is actually a process that occurs commonly in other parts of the body, such as embryonic development. It's actually seen in cancer as well, and it is a induction of the growth of those blood vessels, and they will actually reach out and grow into areas that need blood supply or oxygen. Another thing that will occur is nerve sprouting, because obviously when a wound occurs, the nerves that are in the skin are going to become damaged, so those need to be replaced. And then also all the openings are going to become covered. So this lays the groundwork then for the scar tissue to begin to form. So you can see here, so this is kind of you can see what angiogenesis looks like. You have just a couple of veins and arteries here, and angiogenesis is going to be induced, and then it's going to dramatically grow until it looks like a tree now, so that it could cover all the area that needs oxygen from the blood supply. The next stage is going to be scarring, and scarring is actually, too much of it can be bad, because there's going to be a lack of sweat glands, hair follicles, and also other glands. So this is why when you have mass scar tissue, or say you have like a large wound, such as a massive burn wound or a massive gash, like you lose a lot of feeling, or you won't produce sweat from that area. So if someone's a burn victim, let's say, all over their body, this can be really detrimental to their body functions, especially not being able to sweat, which is an important process needed for maintaining homeostasis in the body. So it's actually found that at the University of Texas that when you have scar tissue, it's really huge risk for carcinoma to occur. And this means that cancerous tumors will actually occur, and it's particularly skin cancer, obviously, because it's occurring on the outside of the body. And this is really an issue because the longer a wound heals to take, the more scar tissue that's going to form, and that sort of thing. So this also calls for potential other ways to, close up these wounds faster and allow less scar tissue to develop. So this image here gives a visual of how a wound formation would occur over the days, and you can see the different stages occurring. So here at days 1 to 3, you see the actual wound has just occurred. So we have all this blood being exposed to the exterior area. You have a couple of clotting factors coming in. So the red here represents fibrin clots. So this is the clot that I was talking about where the blood will actually stop. And you can see that the blood vessels over here are really far away and they've been damaged, so they're exposed. So this is 1 to 3 days that this clot forms. And then 3 to 10 days, you're still going to see this clot because this is an actual scab that you would see that you may be tempted to pick at and that sort of thing. And you can see here all these little cells are the things I mentioned earlier, such as the neutrophil or the lymphocyte, and they actually have macrophages here underneath, which are also known for disposing of foreign bacteria or viruses or disease and that sort of thing. And you can also see here with the blood vessels that angiogenesis has definitely occurred and rebuilt the area. And so this scab, what it's going to do is allow these cells here, which are going to grow under together and then push up. So what you see here is that the orange cells, which were new cells, but they're called migrating cells, they're underneath, and that the cells on top regrow each other. So this is why when you see a scar, it can be kind of puffy, and also it regrows in kind of like a webbing type system. So you kind of think of it like knitting it all back together. So this is the scar tissue that is really at risk for having cancer, and you can see because of it having this regrowth, this unexpected regrowth, it allows opportunity for cancer, which is an unlimited growth, to really occur. So in terms of trauma, right, so this obviously process took a while, it took a couple of days. Blood loss actually accounts for 40% of all deaths seen in trauma patients that occur before hospital arrival. So let's say someone's in a car accident and they call an ambulance and they have a major, gash to the stomach or anything like that, and they're bleeding out essentially. And most of these patients, 40% of them, die because they can't stop the blood before they get to the hospital where they have, the proper surgical treatments that they need to survive. It's also even worse because in military combat, 90% of the deaths that are considered medically preventable, so these deaths could have been prevented if the soldiers were in a medical environment that had the basic tools. 90% of them are because of blood loss. So this, again, really calls for a need, something that can stop this bleeding fast. And another thing is that hemorrhage shocks are also caused because of blood loss occurring faster. And if they were able to stop the blood loss, hemorrhages wouldn't occur, which is another common thing that occurs during, hospital arrivals and ambulances, or even during surgeries. So there really does need to be a solution, and there's actually a undergraduate student who developed a gel called Vetigel that can instantaneously stop bleeding. So how this works is it accelerates the process of platelet formation and actually mimics the extracellular matrix that platelets also tried to mimic. It conforms to the wound site, so it can fit around any kind of wound, small or large, and this also allows for potential surgical usages, so say internal and external wounds are bleeding out. It also forms a dual barrier because you can see here, so you have a wound, you're going to put the gel on it, and then you're going to apply a polymer spray, and this polymer spray is really based off of the general polymer system of a plant that you would see in its sense of its cell wall and how it regrows itself when it's damaged. Now you can see here in their research that it takes at least 10 minutes for blood to kind of start becoming under control in a natural environment, but with the Vetigel, it instantaneously stops the bleeding, and within 10 minutes it's essentially non-existent. So that's pretty ridiculous because that could make massive movements forward in the medical field. So now we're actually going to watch how this gel would work. So this video here is going to show you what Vetigel would actually look like if you were to apply it to a stimulation of a wound. So I have a piece of meat here, and they're going to have a tube here that's going to stimulate what a blood vessel would look like if it was severed or a incision was made into the flesh. So you're going to make an incision, and blood is going to start rushing out like it would in a human body, maybe a little more drastically. But first they're going to add the gel, which is going to actually stop the bleeding, which you can see is almost instantaneously. Then they're going to apply the spray polymer, and that is what's going to harden the gel and ensure that it stops in terms of the bleeding doesn't come back, and also allows the wound to heal completely. So this is what actually helps initiate that faster healing process that the thing has been shown. So if you have any questions, please comment below, feel free, and I'll be glad to answer them.